session we did, Response from Non-Responders, was reporting out a study that the Council for Research Excellence did. I should tell you who the council is. It's a group of 40 Nielsen clients who helped Nielsen spend its money to do fundamental methodological research. And this particular project was a very fundamental methodological research question, and it addressed the question of non-response bias. Do the people who do not cooperate with Nielsen in their diary and their meter samples, is their viewing different from the people who do? Because while a response rate to a survey tells you something, it is not always the case that a higher response rate is better. What really matters is how different are the people who respond from the people who don't. And the challenge there is we never know what the viewing is of the people who don't respond because they don't respond. It's amazing, though, what a couple $1 million can do in terms of incenting people who otherwise do not respond to take our phone calls or our mailings or our visits, and we used a multi-mode method. The study, I should acknowledge Cyril Chagrin, who's on the council. She chairs the non-response committee, and this study began about 2-3 years ago. And Cyril went out and brought experts in, including Bob Groves, the census director, who presented here at the ARF conference. And Bob's the renowned expert on non-response and helped guide the analysis. And Cyril and Peter Miller actually presented the data here yesterday. And what we looked at were, we knew demographically who responds and who don't because we can compare that to universe estimates, but we don't know what the viewing is, and we don't know other aspects of how people view. We don't necessarily know what the media equipment is for people who don't respond. We don't know how important TV is in their lives. And most importantly all, we don't know how much they view. So what we did was we recruited a sample, and we got about 90% of the people who had already participated in the sample to work with us in our survey. But we got somewhere around 60% of the people who refused to cooperate. With the right incentive, we were able to ask them questions. Now, they didn't have diaries. This was all based on recall. But what we showed was, in fact, surprising, because the standard wisdom was the people who don't participate in samples view differently. In fact, TV is not much important to them, which is why they didn't participate in the sample. Actually, what we found is overall there were a few differences in amount of viewing between the responders and the non-responders, which is pretty significant. If one's using a sample of responders, it tells you, gee, you know, even with a response rate in the 50s or so, you can get pretty good indication of what the viewership is. Then we did find some points of problems. People with more expensive equipment seem less likely to cooperate, and that could be a problem because more equipment could mean different viewing. And people, for certain networks, for certain times of day, there's a difference. And it's certainly not like we're washing our hands and say everything's great, no more research is needed. What would a research study be if there were no more research needed? But it did instill confidence in the people who've looked at these numbers that, gee, you know, we got a pretty good handle. This old-fashioned idea of a random sample is a pretty good one. So research is ongoing. One thing we're planning as a result of this is a mini summit on the whole issue of non-response, because a lot, not just the findings, but a lot of the understanding generally about non-response is non-intuitive. There's just a sense that, gee, if I got more responders, I would have a more accurate result. And it's not necessarily so. Again, if there's not much different from the responders and the non-responders in what you're trying to measure, then that may not improve. In fact, in some cases, it's been shown to make the samples less accurate. So what we're looking to do is work with the MRC, the Media Ratings Council, and jointly sponsor an industry event and have representatives from a number of industry groups, Nielsen clients, some academic people there, and we'll reach out to the ARF as well to really raise this issue front and center, because it's not simply a television issue. It's actually not simply an audience measurement issue. It's an issue generally for any kind of marketing research, but our focus on this has been on audience measurement.
So all I need to do is not respond, and you guys will send me a nice bribe?
Well, if someone is doing a non-response study, if someone's doing a non-response study and hold out, you know, non-responders are often given a higher incentive to participate. Certain classes. My dad, God bless him, he filled out a Nielsen diary and got $1. But at his age, he had the time to do it. Younger people, a little tougher to recruit, and so sometimes they need higher incentives to do that. But this was a very specialized study. It was really Even the people at the University of Michigan refer to this as a landmark study because it's state-of-the-art in terms of non-response, the multi-mode, and I could go on describing it, but if you're really interested, the study's up on the web. You can see it there. That's a good empirical question. We don't know. I would hesitate. That one thing I learned in this is that there's not a type of person who is a non-responder. It's non-responding to a particular type of question. So depending on what the question is, and again, that would be empirical, we would look at different media. One question we have now with Nielsen is, Nielsen's beginning to bring meters onto the PCs in the homes of the people in their sample. Is there a non-response issue there? So I would say we don't know. We may seek to do another study to find that out. But the purpose of the symposium is to identify, well, what are the questions now in the industry? The fact that there was less difference was surprising, and the fact that bringing more people into the sample may not make the sample more accurate is also surprising, but that's because if you're bringing in just the people who an incentive will get to respond, they may view differently from other people. So just adding more to the sample and getting response rate from a 50 to a 60 does not actually improve response rates. In fact, I saw a statistic that Bob Groves, now census director, had cited some studies they did that every 5% increase in response rate may at best give you something like a 1% reduction in non-response bias. So there comes a point where it just financially it becomes very expensive to raise those response rates, and the results that you get may not make the difference. There are certain demographics that go along with non-response. In fact, as Bob Groves reported in his talk on the census, he reminded us that people in densely populated areas like New York City have a higher non-response rate. The point, though, is the behavior of the non-responder different from the behavior of the responder? That's what this study allowed us to look at. So we know who the non-responder, we can describe them demographically, we can describe them with a lot of criteria. But the issue, whether or not they're different from the responders, that's something you don't know unless you actually speak to the non-responders, who by definition are tough to get hold of. Right? That's why the study cost as much as it did. So one thing I didn't mention, and again I want to acknowledge Cyril Chagrin from Univision, who chaired the committee, is that one of the purposes of the research was to learn from the comments of the non-responders so as to help inform Nielsen's efforts to, in fact, increase the response rates. Cooperation is important. I didn't mean to imply that it isn't. So there's learning. There's a committee of the Council for Research Excellence called the Insights to Practice, wherein we take the learnings from our research, sit down at a table with Nielsen and say, gee, how can we apply this? How can we make the methodology better? So while the public face of this is about the results of the survey, there's a private part of this working with Nielsen so that future cooperation rates continue to increase.